right, welcome to the show to Chad Wolf, the former acting United States Secretary of Homeland Security and president of Wolf Global Advisors and chair of Homeland Security at the America First Policy Institute. Chad, it's great to talk to you. Thank you for being here with me. And let's just take a look at Minnesota. We're all reacting to what happened over the weekend, where it seemed like some agitators were, I think, deliberately trying to obstruct ICE from doing their job. And what happened from there did not look great. I don't think any side looks particularly good in this, but I want to get your assessment of what you saw.
Yeah, obviously, tragic situation anytime there's an officer involved shooting and someone loses their life. So I think over the last couple of weeks in Minnesota, to include this past weekend, I think you've got a couple of things going on there that make the situation extremely chaotic, but also dangerous. Dangerous not only for ICE officers, but for those around those officers as well. And so you've got local officials like the governor and the mayor and others encouraging these types of agitators to interfere with a law enforcement operation, which is what is occurring there in Minnesota, in Minneapolis specifically. ICE has criminal targets that they are going after, and the general public should not interfere and should not inject themselves into that operation. And when they do, you know, the officers in a split second have a lot of different things to process, and they have to take action to make sure that their safety is number one concern, but that they can do the mission. So that's what's going on at the moment. It's not just peaceful protest, and it's individuals inserting themselves either with the vehicle or running up to officers, pushing back on officers, putting their hands on officers, and doing other things that, you know, again, it's not going to turn out well on a variety of fronts. I'm going to let the investigations play out. I think if you look at just a video or one or two or three different videos, it doesn't tell the whole picture. You've got to do eyewitness testimony. You have to understand what was occurring before the incident took place to give it the right context. So I'm going to let those investigations play out. But what I can tell you is that the most concerning thing that I see is two things. One, our local officials making comments like DHS is not a law enforcement agency, which is inaccurate and very untrue. Calling them, ICE a propaganda machine, that they're untrained, none of which is true. And then that incentivizing people, residents in this case, to go out and to interfere with ICE, and there are consequences for that.
Yeah, I think that's all valid. And I having watched all the Zapruder film footage, I don't know if the shooting was justified, but I think the important point that everyone seems to be glossing over in the establishment media and on the Democrat side is, why were these people there? It was not some sort of legitimate protest. They didn't have signs up. They're showing up armed. And here's the point I want to make specifically. Why do you block ICE vehicles? I think that this is what's happening in these things, is the ICE is being obstructed from going through with their operations. And when you fully stop a targeted operation, it feels like you're risking your life when you do that. And yet that's specifically what we've seen here.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think for some reason there's a perception out there, I think mainly pushed by the left-wing media, certain politicians, leaders, and others, that somehow ICE is not a law enforcement agency, that it's almost like a mall cop of some kind, that it's some type of inferior, and that they don't have legitimate law enforcement authorities. And they do. They carry a badge, they carry a gun, they have arrest authorities, they can arrest, obviously, illegal aliens, but they can also arrest U.S. citizens if U.S. citizens are breaking the law. And so if you try to interrupt that, there are problems. So, in your local neighborhood, if the FBI is doing criminal operation and they shut down the street, you don't see a dozen people go in there and start pushing around FBI agents, but yet somehow they think it's okay to do that with ICE, and it's not. It's not in any sense of the word. It's against the law, and again, there will be consequences for that.
Right. So do you think I should start wearing body cameras? Because I've done a lot of work into research into a lot of these police involved shootings over the years. And the body cameras have seemed to really help the officers because it allows for things to get sorted out generally in their favor. And I think it also probably holds them to account to themselves as well, knowing that everything's going to be on camera. So it just seems smart. I mean, are we at that point now?
Yeah, look, I think if it gives the public some reassurance, then I would be for that. I think any law enforcement agency, if you lose the confidence of those that you are trying to protect, the community, that's a significant problem. So if I'm in favor of ICE doing any number of things to start to assure people that they're there for the right reasons, doing the right things. And so if a body camera or anything else just validates that in people's minds, then I would be for that.
So I want to talk about where we go from here. Do you think that ICE is able to operate effectively in Minnesota and Minneapolis at this time? I'm obviously a huge supporter of what they do in general, but this is getting very hot and we want to de-escalate. So what is the path to doing that?
Yeah, I think they can still do operations there. I think my take is there's got to be some off ramps. And so I would give a number of conditions to both the governor and the mayor to say, look, if these conditions are met, right, which is allow ICE into your jails to pick up dangerous people, provide some security and some protection for ICE as they go out and do operations, right? If you have to close a street there in Minneapolis, it's much better for the local police to do that, because those residents know the police officers' cars, right? They know what that usually looks like. They know the uniforms. They probably know the police officer. That's very different than if ICE is trying to do that. So I would lay out a number of conditions, and then I would tell the governor, if these conditions are met and the violence starts to come down, then over the next week, I can withdraw a certain percentage of my resources, because now you're doing that job. Local police is doing the job that they should have been doing. And then if the violence continues to decrease, perhaps you withdraw another percent over the following week. So yeah, obviously the Trump administration gets what they want because ICE is continuing to do its job. And now we have local police supporting them. And of course, the governor and the mayor eventually, not right away, get what they want, which is, the majority of ICE out of Minneapolis.
So the president announced recently that Tom Homan is going to be deployed to Minneapolis, and he seems to have a pretty good assessment of what to do on these things. But it's odd to see a border czar being deployed to Minneapolis of all places. So what do you think his job is going to be there? And do you feel confident that he could be the guy who could solve this?
Yeah, I do. Look, Tom's primary mission has been deportations and removals. And so that's what ICE is doing there, is they're picking up dangerous, criminal, illegal aliens and then eventually removing them from the country. I think this also tells you that the president's not happy with the current direction of what's going on. And so he's sending in Tom Homan to right the ship here a little bit. And the question is whether, Tom's going to go in and hopefully has solutions and is going to talk with the mayor and the governor. I think that's what's needed most right now. Look, they're not going to agree on everything, right? I mean, there's some strong disagreements, but you've got to open the conversations and you got to sit down with them and you got to say, where are we? Where can we agree to work together to try to bring the temperature down here a little bit? And I think Tom's the perfect guy to do this because he's got operational experience that others just don't have. He may have new ideas about how to bring that, bring it together there and allow ICE to do their job. And so I think he's the perfect guy for this. Yeah,
I agree. And I'm optimistic that he'll be able to start finding some solutions. But the thing that I'm most scared about is that it does feel like the institutional left does like what's happening. And I'm not saying that Alex Preddy, who was shot, wanted to get shot, but I am saying that they're being deliberately provocative. They are institutionalized. They are well organized. We're seeing these signal chats where they're deploying towards where ICE is operating at a pretty organized way. And it seems like at least some of them are going to be very comfortable getting martyred for their cause. And we're seeing how this is playing out in the public. I think people pay very close attention to shows like mine. They're going to understand there's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of detail. But I think a lot of Americans are just casually picking this stuff up on social media, and it doesn't look good for ICE the way it's being framed. And I think a lot of people see this politically. And I think that's causing a lot of problems. I just wanted you to react to some of that and see if that's part of where your thinking's at.
Yeah. I mean, I see that as well. Obviously, I see some of the polling out there and I see some of the online reaction and others. I think ICE's mission has always been not extremely clear to most Americans. Enforcement of immigration law is sometimes hard to understand how it all works. Yeah. It's very different than others. And so as the saying goes, anytime you're explaining, you're losing, right? And so I think ICE and DHS is always explaining the mission, because their thought is, well, if I can explain it, people will understand. But I agree with you. I think there's some on the left that don't want to understand. And even if they understand, they're still going to be very negative. So I think you have to lead with the facts. You have to continue to show that you're picking up criminal illegal aliens and some of the worst, and give percentages, give data, show your homework, show the facts. And it's hard to refute that. Now, if the facts aren't on your side, that's obviously something you've got to deal with. You've got to then pivot to a strategy where the facts are on your side and go after the worst of the worst and making sure that you are explaining this. And then I think the last thing I would say is, I think what has hurt the Trump administration, specifically the department right now, is some statements, very quick statements after an incident where not all the facts are known and certain statements are made. And I think the general public are kind of scratching their head and they're saying, well, I'm not really sure I see that, or I agree with that, or I understand what you're saying there. It seems like that's a quick rush to judgment. It may be true. Certain people may be domestic terrorists, and they, all of it may come out as the investigation unfolds. But to make these accusations so quickly, I think that does turn off some people.
Well, I've got the obvious follow-up to that. So then what do we do? Because if you look at what President Trump literally did in the aftermath of this, he kind of nailed it. He didn't defend the agent. But again, I watched all the footage. I don't know if the guy needed to be shot. And Trump didn't come out and say he did need to be shot. And now he's kind of pushing Kristi Noem aside and bringing Homan in, who might be a safer pair of hands here. He even called Governor Walz, said it was a very good call, and they're on the same page, even though Walz has sounded completely insane in all of his press conferences. So what do you think is, so how come, if the president is on point, then what went wrong here with the messaging?
Well, I think a couple of things can be true all at the same time, which is to say, you can support your local law enforcement officers or even ICE, right? The president or anyone else can support them while saying, I'm not going to rush to judgment. I'm going to let the investigation play out. But here's what I do. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to the law enforcement officers because we train them. We arm them. We badge them. We tell them to go out and do a very difficult job. And we believe that they do the best work that they can. And so you can support them all you want, but you can say, I'm going to let the investigation play out. I think there are others that have not quite had that same message.